Hello, welcome to my video for EDAD 701 Week 3, where this week we'll be looking at some new topics and new discussions. This week we'll be looking at just some background knowledge of what has led me to this point in my professional and educational career to want to be a director of special ed or a director of instruction somewhere, and maybe some of the people that influenced me along the way. I will also take a look at some other responsibilities and roles of a director of instruction or coordinating instructional practices. Uh, excuse me, we'll take a look at things like differentiation strategies. We'll take a look at instructional approaches, and we'll also touch on some aspects of summer school as well, kind of how that works. Schools can generate revenue and funds for that. We'll also take a look at some innovative practices that are currently going on in PK through 12 schools across the country. We'll take a look at some of the pros and cons of virtual learning, something that has been very relevant to our careers and the lives of students in recent times. And we'll also talk about the impact a director of learning can have on a program. And then we'll wrap up kind of talking about the rigorous curriculum design, the unit implementation, creation, and some of the early stages of that if somebody were to become a director of instruction. Kind of take a look at years 1 through 3, and we won't get to every piece of information that there needs to be known about that. We'll provide some good guidelines and information about what maybe you can expect in those early years and what you should be doing in those stages to get on your feet and hit the ground running. So just as before, I'll try to divide it up into each section and answer the prompts. So if there is something specifically you are looking for, should be easier to find it that way. But starting with section 1 and building this background knowledge, tell me about what led you to want to be an instructional leader. And I'll kind of combine this with number 2, which says describe the day or moment that you decided now was the time to bring that idea to fruition. So my road to having a desire to be a instructional leader was influenced in part by uh, my director of special education at the school in which I work in now. I've only been a special education teacher now for 6 years, so I have some experience, but maybe not as much as others who might be in the program as well. I know some people have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years of experience. So I'm still a little bit on the younger side as far as that goes. But uh, my director of special education, when I started working there, within his or then my first couple of years and his observations of me, he noted on my annual reviews that he thought I would be a strong candidate to be in a leadership role within the school someday, whether that was a director of SPAD or a director of instruction or in some other admin role. He thought that would be suiting and fitting for me based off my talent skill, my characteristics, my personality, and my leadership traits that I had exhibited throughout my time at Chance Light so far. And when this was first mentioned to me, I didn't think a lot of it. I had always thought about pursuing my education further beyond my bachelor's degree. I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to take that, if that was just pursuing a master's in special education teaching, or if that was going to be pursuing a degree in an administrative role further down the line. Um, so I kind of left those discussions to the wayside for a bit. I didn't think about them too much. I didn't even discuss them much with my director of SPED. But as I kept going along and teaching, he kept encouraging me and reminding me that he really thought it would be a good idea for me. He had mentioned that not everybody is suited to be in a leadership role, and that's not necessarily a negative thing on an individual, but those who are fit to do so should pursue it. So it was just his continued encouragement and support He was a director and an individual who I respected very much. I thought he always did an excellent job of providing and setting examples for teachers, staff, students, and families. I talked about him a little bit last week, my week 2 reflection as well, and some of those positive characteristics that he exhibited for me. So just his continued support and uh, his desire for to see me take these next steps really kind of pushed me over the top. So it was the exact moment. It was during our remote learning during the COVID time period. He had just again talked to me about, pursuing a degree in an admin role, being a director of SPED somewhere. And I started to look at various programs. I looked at my alma mater, Northern Illinois University. Uh, I also looked at other online programs. Tricky part is I teach in Illinois, but I live in Wisconsin, so tuition costs, things like that. Uh, I found UW Superior, and I found that their program was completely online, and that was kind of what pushed me over to get that started. So um, I drive an hour to work as it is right now. I didn't want to be driving to university late at night if I didn't have to do that. Uh, of course, I would have if there are no other options, but this online course program was available, so I chose that route. So, who in your life has tapped you or encouraged you to take your career to the next level? I kind of touched on that already, talking about my director of SPED. My first few years there, he really was the one who pushed me for that. I didn't talk about pursuing more advanced degrees with anybody else, really. Kind of kept it to myself and the discussions I had with him. Why do you think why do you think he, she, or they, excuse me, felt so strongly? Kind of touched on that as well in the beginning, but his message to me was just he thought I had the poise, the compassion, and the leadership skills necessary to perform in a role as a leader in a school somewhere. Certainly, there are characteristics that a leader must have, whether that's in education or if it's in a factory or if it's in a standard business office. There are certain traits, features, and characteristics that I believe an individual must have in order to lead others, and not only lead others, but lead others effectively, efficiently, and to keep progressing your business, your company, your school towards a positive and growing direction. And they felt I had those qualities and those characteristics just by the observations of seeing me interact with my peers and colleagues, other teachers, paraprofessionals, social workers, security people in the building, janitors, and other administrators, and also my interactions with my students and their families as well. At the Changeline Education Center, we have a very unique and diverse student population and a very unique and diverse family and community population as well. And, at times that's not always easy to deal with for a teacher or someone else in education. I completely understand why. But it's how you deal with them, how you problem solve with them, how you approach them in meaningful, respectful, and positive ways that I think they felt so strongly about me taking on a higher leadership role. What are some of the best practices that you have used that you feel are what made you a successful, impactful, and distinguished educator? And how did you learn them? A little bit of that is just trial by fire. I think as an educator and those in teacher roles or administrative roles, there's going to be some of that inherently, and just kind of comes with the job. I think sometimes people are afraid to say something like that, or they want to think that they had all the answers right off the bat. It came naturally to them, and I don't know. I personally believe that's ever true. I think you will make mistakes. You will take a step back and observe yourself, take input from others, and if you truly and honestly reflect on the growth or the changes you've made throughout your career, that's when you can start to make improvements and start to look at what you did, maybe not necessarily wrong, but what you maybe didn't do efficiently, and turn a weakness into a strength. And um, kind of just being honest with myself, objective with myself on um, what I saw myself doing in an educational role, taking the information from um, reviews and feedback from other administrators. I think sometimes as well, when we get feedback from those above us or those in leadership roles, we might sometimes just look at the good aspects of what we did. And understandably so, everybody likes to hear the things they do well. But we also need to look at those things where maybe they say there's a deficit or a little bit of a weakness and really concentrate on those things. The things that we do well still need attention and detail, but a lot of those times they might come naturally to us. And it's up to us to take what might be perceived as a weakness and really focus on that and turn that into a strength. I think that is something that I did um, to kind of make myself a well-rounded individual and create the educator that I have become today. So that kind of wraps up section one there and some of the background knowledge and how I've arrived to um, this stage in my professional career. So section two here, we're going to talk about some responsibilities and different instructional practices regarding a director of instruction and some other aspects, of our schools. So number one says, who ensures staff are utilizing inclusive instructional practices based on research, best practice, and effective differentiation strategies? And tell me about what inclusive practices are currently being used in your district. So at the Chance Light Education Center, who is in charge of ensuring staff are utilizing instructional practices and inclusive practices is the director of special education for our program. And it's not just entirely her, although she is the main person responsible for that. We also have a regional administrator as well, and the regional administrator goes from the different programs in the Illinois area where our private therapeutic day program has multiple placements. And she works with the directors of special education, the site directors, to ensure that things are going properly, things are running efficiently, and they are getting the help and support they need. But as far as the day-to-day operations, in our program, we have one middle school classroom and two high school classrooms. So we have students in 6th, 7th, 8th, and then 9 through 12 graders in our program. So we do need to use a lot of different approaches and differentiation, which we'll talk about in a moment, to make sure that we are reaching all of these individual students. While each classroom only has 10 students in there, they all have very unique needs. They all learn in different ways. They all have different accommodations, modifications within their IEPs, and that must be met at all times. And we have to ensure that the strengths of each student are being built on and continue to become stronger, while at the same time looking at maybe some of those weaknesses and turning those into strengths, and then progressing the students to higher levels of functioning, learning, and academic growth. So one thing I wanted to share was have this short little kind of pamphlet article from the University of Pennsylvania. And I chose this one because it's a lot of these inclusive teaching evidence-based practices align with things that we do at the Chance Light Education Center and things that have been stressed to us to incorporate in the classrooms there. So I'll just go through this list here and kind of talk about some of the connections that I might have to them. So number one is to communicate high expectations and provide students with the support to meet them. Communicate expectations and multiple strategies to approach the work. Indicate that all students can meet the challenge with practice. Build in low stakes, well structured practice on skills required for tests and assignments. We'll see this come back up again a little bit later on towards the end of the video when we talk about that rigorous curriculum design and the pre and post assessments and how we implement those units of instruction throughout the school year. And give students feedback that includes recognition of your high standards in the sense the student can meet them. So the big thing in number one here is just communication with students. When students are succeeding, when they're doing things well, is just as important as communicating with students when maybe something is not going the way it needs to be. When students need to know what is expected of them, what they need to know, and why they need to know it. And we see that all the time in our connections with the rigorous curriculum design. That's very important to those priority standards. We need to facilitate students' sense of identity within your field. So give students authentic tasks such as primary research, analysts of authentic data, or other versions of practices in the discipline appropriate for the course level. Make student work visible to a wider audience than just the instructors or teacher assistants. Ask students to reflect on how their backgrounds can contribute to their success. Provide students with diverse role models in your field and reach out to talented students in your class to encourage them to continue in your field. There's a couple of main points in here that I wanted to address, looking at making student work visible to a wider audience, and also asking students to reflect on how their backgrounds can contribute to their success as well. Those are a couple key points that have been emphasized to us from our Director of Special Education and the administrative team. Taking that student work and showing it off in a proud an exhibit manner that shows them that not only do we care about the work you're doing here, we want everybody else to see the work you're doing here. And we have a wide audience of people who are always acknowledging and seeing the things that you're doing, and it does matter to a lot of people. And then asking students to reflect on their backgrounds. Students come from a variety of different backgrounds, cultures, and set of circumstances outside the school building. And building upon that, drawing strengths from that can help them in the classroom as well. But taking the things outside of the classroom and using them how we can inside the classroom will help us there as well. I help students see that the academic ability develops over time and takes effort. The big thing that I want to stress here is point number one. Try to highlight that for you, but stress that struggle is normal. Students experiencing stereotype threat in particular will be more likely to persist if they see their difficulties as typical ones. Sometimes in education, we see students become disheartened or lose motivation due to an overwhelming feeling of struggling. And one thing that we work with students is, struggling, going through hard times, having difficulty is normal. And being challenged in life and in school is a normal process and not something that you should feel ashamed of or not something that you should feel as abnormal. We need to welcome that challenge and welcome those hardships and It's how we learn to overcome those where we see the most growth. So don't back away from the struggles. Don't think they're unique to just you. Everybody, whether it's an athlete, a movie actor, your mom, your dad, your role model, everybody has gone through a struggle, and no, you're no different. It's how we figure out how to work through and overcome those struggles is what matters. Use strategies such as active learning and or group work. Group work has been a big emphasis here at our program. Um, we don't want to get stuck in the habit of just doing one method of learning. Not just doing teacher lectures, notes, worksheets, and calling it a day, but mixing and matching different modes of teaching and communication to students. And touching on differentiation here for a moment, which I know is the next question in the set here. It kind of goes back to differentiation as well. When we do differentiation, that's using different strategies in the classroom to promote student engagement, student growth, and student learning as well. A couple different examples of differentiation and using strategies. A really common one and a good one is in math. When we're working with monetary aspects in math, such as fractions, we can easily have students use um, real life, fake paper, plastic coins, and money to mimic fractions and to show the practical and real life use of some of the things that they are learning. Um, we can also use things such as rotating stations within the classrooms as well. So rotating stations would refer to the ability to have students um, work in different environments within the classroom. Maybe one area they are watching videos that relate to content areas. Maybe in a different area or station, they are working in small groups with their peers. And then maybe in a third area, they are working on individual work. And in the fourth area, maybe they're working more with teacher-led instruction. Um, but providing different strategies, different differentiation to students, and encouraging them to learn in different ways promotes active learning and helps to ensure that students understand, what they need to know, what they need to do. Number 5 here, get to know your students. So meet individually with students at some point in the semester, perhaps to discuss a class assignment, get their feedback, or understand why they're in the class. This is actually something I do at Chance Life that is unique to maybe my program or other therapeutic day schools as well. So when we get a new student in our class, I always meet with them in a one-on-one setting the first day that they're in the school. And I introduce myself to them. I get to know them, some of their background, some of their interests. And I ask them, maybe why did you get referred to our school? Um, what are some things that interest you outside and inside school? What are some of your hobbies? What do you think your strengths and weaknesses are? What are your goals for high school? Um, do you plan to go to college? Do you plan to pursue a specific career after school? And what can I do to help you achieve these goals and achieve the things that you want to do in your life? I do believe that meeting individually with students, it says at some point, I believe multiple points throughout the semester really helps students to know that you care about the things they say, they care about their interest, and you want them to succeed. And then to understand social psychological phenomena such as stereotype threats and implicit bias. So stereotype threat creates underperformance in some students when they feel that the instructor believes they cannot do well because stereotyped qualities assumed to belong to their group. And implicit biases are unconscious assumptions that we make about others, often based on stereotypes. And the last one here mentions microaggressions, are small, often subtle, and unintentional comments and actions that marginalize particular groups or individuals. So for ourselves as educators, I'm also making sure that we are aware of these stereotypes, of these inherent and biases, and of microaggression, results as well. We want to make sure that students in our classrooms are not hearing, seeing, or using language that exhibits any inherent biases or stereotypical language. Making sure that all students know that everyone comes in with a clean slate. There, there is no bias or um, we don't have any preconditioned thoughts on you as an individual when you come into the building. Everyone is treated the same way. Everyone gets the same respect, fairness, understanding as everyone else. Our next section here, who coordinates and oversees your summer school program? And tell me what you know about summer school, more precisely about how it generates funds for the district. As far as the summer school material goes, at the Chance Light Education Center, since we are a therapeutic day program, our revenue for our program works much the same way as it does during the normal school year. When students are referred to our school program for the 2021-2022 school year, the district would pay a sum of $257 on a school day basis to have their district student enrolled with our program. And in summer school, that number for us would end up staying the same. So if we have 10 students in our summer school program, we are receiving 10 students times the daily amount for a student to be enrolled in a therapeutic day or alternative setting with us. But speaking more about summer school in general, that summer school comes from the decision to have it or not at Chance Light in my program comes from the administrative team. So it's, of course, not just the decision of our director of special education. Well, they do have a big say in whether they think we should have it or not. And we actually work with our cooperating districts who refer students to us uh, to see if summer school is an option they would like us to present as well. So on my first year at Chance Light Education Center, we did have summer school. Now it's because the Rockford Public School District, they had a large number of special education students that were going to need summer services, and they didn't have all this programs or space available for those students. So they referred them to us and wanted us to service them through the school year. So we had it. That would have been in 2017 and also the 2018 summer year as well. So part of it depends on our partnering districts. Can we get students enrolled for summer? The 2019, 2020, 2021 school year now, we have not had summer school at Chance Light because we just have not had the enrollment from our cooperating districts to have students in our program. There is a certain threshold and number of students that the administrative team wants to see. Typically, the administrative team here at Chance Light, they want to see a minimum of 10 students be available for summer service programs. Otherwise, the costs of pay for teachers and employees to run the facilities just ends up not being worth the cost that they bring in. So they will choose to not do it in those cases. So this year, as I mentioned, we did not have it, but I do know that for 2022, the Rockford Public School District has already stated that they would like for us to have a summer school program. I think that's something we're going to be looking at next year. So we're going to be working with them throughout this next school year and making sure that we have enough students to have an effective summer school program. But as far as funding and how it generates revenue for districts, since I don't work with a specific district, I'm not fully familiar on all the details, but I do know as far as funding from the Department of Wisconsin Education, a lot of the funding for summer schools, they'll mention down here, comes from Title IV funds. So Title IV funds may be used by the LEA to coordinate with other funding sources to support and enhance services related to summer school activities. Uh, so it looks like Title IV funds provide the funding for summer school programs, but how do schools generate revenue for that? And I found this information here from East State Notes and talks about some of the financing in summer school by Michael Griffith and Kyle Zinth. And they analyzed some of the funding formulas and kind of where some of the spending goes on summer school programs. What they found was there is a primary funding formula for summer school programs, and we'll go through this here quickly. Most states' primary funding formulas function by providing a foundation or base amount and then multiplying that amount by a weight given to each student. For example, if a state has a base funding amount of 4,000 and provides a weight value of 1.0 for general education students, with an additional weight of 0.25 for at-risk students, and it should say 2.0 for special education students, and districts would receive the following amounts per student. So this kind of just provides a general look at where the money comes from, where the funding comes from. It's going to depend on the number of students a school is servicing for those summer programs. So this is going to be different based on if it's a general education student, if it's an at-risk student, or if it's a special education student. Interestingly enough, they had this section down here. How much do states really spend on summer school programs? One of the goals of the study was to determine exactly how much funding, both in total and per student, is being expensed by states on summer school programs. What this research found is that in most states, it is not possible to determine exactly how much states are spending on summer schools. One reason for this is that when states fund summer school through the primary funding formula, they do not require school districts to report back on the total state dollars spent to run summer school programs. Another complication is the use of categorical funding. State categorical programs often give districts the option of spending the funds not only on summer school, but also on other programs, other programs such as after school and or tutoring. While they might require districts to report on their total expenditures, they do not require districts to document precisely where the money was expended. This last portion down here was the key that stuck out to me. They do not require districts to document precisely where the money was expended. So with summer schools, things can get a little bit trickier in regard to that as we look at summer schools and how they function. That's going to vary a lot from district to district and state to state as well. Typically with a summer school program, the hours for students to be in school are a lot less than they are during a typical school year. So through our normal school year in August through May, students are in school anywhere from roughly 7 hours a day. With summer school, that number can fluctuate. It can be 4 hours a day, it can be 5 hours a day, it could be 6 hours a day. And then in that time, are you providing food services for the students? What is your cost for transportation for the students? And what are you spending on your in-house programs and facility functions? Your employment counts. How many teachers are you employing during the summertime? Are you fully staffing things such as social workers, security personnel, paraprofessionals, teacher aides? Well, these are all factors that are up in the air for summer school, and they're going to affect how much money is being spent on the summer school or the programs within a district. And is that funding coming from your federal grants or is it coming from your state funds? So it can be hard to track those numbers, but typically a school is spending, less money per day to house a summer school program than are, during the typical school year. So that's where you might see some of that revenue come in as well. I know some districts don't even provide transportation for their summer school program. So parents are liable to pick up and drop off their kids on a daily basis. That right there cuts out a large transportation cost for bus drivers, vehicle maintenance, and other things like that. So, um, really going to vary from district to district, school to school, but typically just the spending is less on a per day basis for those summer school programs. Who provides accountability for effective instructional models with a strong focus on equity and literacy practices used across grade levels, departments, and classrooms. Um, I also touched a little bit on that as well earlier in our discussion about inclusive practices and differentiation in the classrooms. But at the Chancellor Education Center, that falls on the Director of Special Education in our building, as well as that regional Director of Special Education as well, who goes from different program to program, checking in to make sure things are going okay. But that doesn't only just fall on the Director of Special Education alone. It does fall on the teachers, the paras, the social workers, the entire team who is working with those students on a daily basis. However, I do believe it is vitally important that the administrator or the leadership group, is involved in those discussions about students, about the instructional approaches, and about the methods being used in the classrooms on a daily basis. We have to make sure that everybody in the school building is working collaboratively with each other to understand exactly what's going on. Are we continuing to use research-based practices? Are we sticking to our units of instruction? Are we making sure that if we are modifying and adapting the work for students, are we still meeting those state standards and those priority standards that need to be there? So, it's through a team effort, starting with the leadership at the top, through the teachers and everybody else in the building to make sure that those instructional practices, are being met and those models, um, are being fair to all students in the building and that all the different departments in the school as well, are aware of what's going on in the classrooms. Are students meeting the state standards? Um, are students on pace? Do we see evidence of student learning, student achievements, and student growth as well? Um, Last section here talking about what excites me or what worries me about any of these potential roles. Um, when it comes down to the topics that we addressed here, uh, for me, what excites me, is again the ability to continue working with um, other individuals. Um, those going into leadership roles, those working on administrative teams, we don't want to just, be held up in an office all day, kind of on our own, doing our own thing, and then, peeping our head out here and there to check in and make sure things are going okay. We want to be involved and be on the ground with the teachers and with the other people in the building to ensure that our programs and our schools are running how they should be and are effectively teaching and learning um, and providing growth for students. And what worries me about that is it can be a lot to tackle. It can be a lot to keep an eye on. We're working with a lot of different individuals, tons of different people, and there are just a lot of steps necessary to take in order to make sure that the standards are being met, instructional methods and approaches are being taught, and we're using data and research-based evidence to promote student learning and growth and achievement. So It's a daily grind and something we have to look at and think about all the time as we go through our processes. It doesn't ever stop or take a break. So it's going to be a tiresome process and something to keep an eye on at all times. Section 3 here, we'll start to take a look at some innovative practices in schools today. We will also talk about some pros and cons of virtual learning. And then we will talk about the potential impact a director of instruction can have on student learning. So, starting off here, we'll take a look at some innovations that are taking place in our schools throughout the country here today. And we'll take a look at this from Vishal Dani from Kitaboo, and they talk about just some of the 7 innovations in K through 12 education. These are some practices that we use in our own schools at the Chancellor Education Center. And I just wanted to touch on some of these that are relevant to things I have done in my own classroom and things that are relevant to my therapeutic day program. I'm not going to read through all of this material, but just kind of touch on it quickly and talk about some of my experiences with this as well. So one of these innovations is a flipped classroom approach. The flipped classroom means a learning model where students go through their study materials at home and do their assignments in the classroom. Students have gotten used to the idea of doing homework at home while they read chapters and make notes in the classroom. With the flipped approach, teachers aim to make the learning process more engaging. This method places emphasis on keeping students engaged in the classroom. And for this, teachers use various means such as augmented reality, interactive ebooks, or conduct pop quizzes or give group assignments. A flipped classroom approach essentially is just to provide a different outlook and a different just a different approach for students, one that is not typical or standard, in the traditional classroom setting. And what this does is it kind of, as it mentions, it flips the room around. Right now, or the traditional classroom approach was students go to class, they take notes, they do a worksheet, and then they go home and supplement that material with some more written work or some more worksheets. Instead, with the flipped classroom approach, students are going home and they are taking on maybe a little more responsibility in themselves because it becomes more responsibility on the student to ensure that they understand the content material. And then when they come back to class, instead of just sitting in their desks and taking notes and doing monotonous work, they are more having active discussions, maybe more group or interactive work with their instructors and peers, but just performing tasks in other manners that might be more engaging and more fulfilling to them. Audiobooks and dictation software. Audiobooks have enabled students to listen to their learning material. Students who are unable to read due to various physical challenges, such as dyslexia, visual impairment, can benefit from audiobooks as they can listen to their course material. Working in special education, this is something that we see a lot, specifically with assistive technology. When I was a student teacher, I worked in a self-contained classroom with a number of students, and audiobooks were something that we used a lot as part of our assistive technology for students who could not read or write all the material on their own. So using the technology and the resources available to us to help students with physical or mental disabilities or impairments and to make sure they're still getting the same quality education that everyone else is as well. A digital content library. A digital content library is a repository of study materials like instructional videos, audiobooks, reading materials, practice assignments. It is a virtual library consisting of interactive learning nuggets, which keep students engaged in content. Teachers can use these resources to explain concepts effectively and maintain interactivity in classrooms. You can find learning resources of different topics, such as mathematics, science, languages, etc., and more. Um, One thing about digital content libraries I wanted to touch on here is this last note here. The content can be made available in multiple languages as per your region specific requirements. So last week we talked about ELL and ESL students. Digital content libraries are a great source for them as well. Students who maybe struggle with English or struggle to read or write in English. A digital content library is a great way to provide alternative resources to them and provide them with content in a way which they will be able to work with it and understand it as well. Social media for collaborative learning. One cannot ignore the importance of social media. Although it is not an innovation made particularly for educational purpose, it has certain features which proves helpful in the learning process. From being an online platform to kill time, social media has evolved into one of the effective mediums to collaborate and interact. Students usually spend a lot of time on social media. We don't need to go into the statistics of how much time teens spent on there, but as it mentions, we cannot just ignore the importance and influence social media has on students today. Um, Social media does not just have to be a platform that students use to kill time and for just recreational enjoyment as well. A good example of collaborative learning with students is so I know some public schools have worked on creating social media pages for various aspects of their school. So, for example, public school might have a project where students create an Instagram page or Facebook page for their high school football team or their basketball team. And they can work on interviewing players and coaches, providing statistical numbers, and updating that web page to work collaboratively with their peers and with other individuals in the building. That still kind of touches on some of those educational aspects. So social media can serve a purpose in our school as well. These last three here, simulation games, augmented reality, and virtual reality, I'll kind of lump them a little bit into one group here. But with augmented reality, this emerging and immersive technology is being put to effective use in the K through 12 education system. In augmented reality, computer-generated graphics are overlaid on images of the physical world. Augmented the reality with digital images. For K-12 students, finding enhanced visuals of plain images on their mobile screen makes for a fun and engaging learning experience. Uh, this idea is really going to carry over into virtual reality and into the simulation games as well. But kind of again, going back to that technology and how we can use technology to supplement our learning materials. Technology is not going to go away. Technology is likely only going to grow and expand and continue to become an important part of our everyday lives, both inside and outside the classroom. So, as that technology becomes more accessible and more common, we should be supplementing it within our schools as well. Um, a lot of biology classes will do this, and we mentioned this last week as well. For schools that maybe don't have access to the same lab or safety equipment, they want to do dissection on animals like a frog, they can do this using augmented reality simulation games or virtual reality technology as well, and still providing students with that same experience. Also touched on this last week a little bit, but for students that are maybe interested in an automotive or mechanic career, these technologies as well can provide great simulations to them and show them, how these parts of a car work, how different aspects come together to help a mechanic with their career. So there are definitely simulations there. I know simulation games. For students that are interested in maybe truck driving or being a farmer, there are simulation games out there that actually do a pretty good job of providing some realistic scenarios of how a truck driving job or how a farming job can work in everyday applications. So um, students are very familiar with the technologies. It's very common to them. And if we can supplement it and use it in our classrooms, then we absolutely should be doing that as well. And then our last section here, assess the potential impact that a director of instruction can have on a program. So when we are looking at how leadership um, affects schools and programs, um, there are a couple different ways which we can look at that. We've talked about some of these concepts already, and a director or those, just in leadership programs are going to have a big influence on, how material in a school is implemented, how the units of curriculum are designed, how they're revised, how the priority standards are met and assessed. But this information comes from Gene Stockard and the impact of administrative decisions on implementation fidelity of direct instruction and student achievement. One thing that she mentioned here that really stuck out to me is these few sentences right here. When examining the impact of implementation fidelity of a program, it is important that the program involved has been found to be effective. If a program were highly effective yet implemented poorly, one would expect that the outcomes would be less positive. However, if a program were not effective, poor implementation can actually result in better outcomes. In other words, a good program that is not done well could have poor outcomes, but a poor program that is not done well could actually have good outcomes simply because it couldn't get worse. Us as directors and those in leadership roles, we have a direct and strong and powerful influence on our programs. So how those programs function on a daily basis, um, the implementation of instructional approaches, of differentiation in classrooms, how our teachers work with students, the community, and the parents, how we look at our units of instruction and make sure that students are showing growth and learning and achievement. That all starts with us at the top. And we have to work collaboratively with our teachers, with our social workers, our psychologists, our other administrative teams, to ensure that we are using those standards to promote student learning, and we can actually see in our data student growth. If we're not seeing student growth, if our data shows a downward trend, that does fall directly on us. And we are the ones who start these processes, and we are the ones who implement the success of these units of instruction in our classrooms to make sure that we are an effective program. And if we are running a poor program, a poor implementation, we are doing a disservice to everybody around us. And as they mentioned in the article there, we don't want to just have a program where people look at it and say, well, things are as bad as they get, it can't get any worse. We don't want to find ourselves in that spot. And it all starts with us at the top to ensure that we never reach those spots to begin with. We have to work diligently and consistently and professionally with those around us to ensure that those practices are being met. But our last section here, we will take a look at our material from Rigorous Curriculum Design from Ainsworth and Donovan. And this week we will talk here about the journey of of rigorous curriculum design. And more specifically, we'll talk about the first 3 years of this implementation. Now, as I mentioned as well, we are not going to get to every aspect that can be, or not every aspect we might need to know about these first 3 years, but we can touch on some of the basics of them and kind of give a guideline of what to expect, what to know, and what are some things that might prepare an individual as they take a director of instruction role with them. So all material here is going to be from the Implementing Curriculum Design, Ainsworth and Diamond 2011. Um, as we're going through this material here, one thing I did want to note is the mention of locations. If you have a Kindle textbook, um, they do not list the where the material is found in page numbers, but listed as location down here at the bottom. So when you see things like location 4939, location 5084, that refers to where the information is found, again, on an Amazon, a Kindle textbook. So I've taken information from Ainsworth and Donovan and just kind of broken it down to year 1, year 2, and year 3. And we'll touch on, again, what are some of the things to expect when a curriculum design is implemented. So in year 1 here, what are some of the things that you can expect? So year 1 here, on location 4939, Donovan and, Ainsworth and Donovan notes, working with teacher feedback, they made the unit stronger each year. They created systems to be sure that principals, central office administrators, and teachers were constantly monitoring the learning of students all year long through their rigorous curriculum design assessments. The key to me here is we're going to be working with principals, office administration, and teachers. And we're constantly monitoring the learning of all students. And this is going to be true of every single year that we are working with our units of instruction. No, this is not just unique to year 1 here, but it's important to know that right off the bat. Every year you work in here, you're always going to be monitoring that student learning. You're going to be working with everyone else on your team to monitor that student learning. Every year will be a tremendous amount of work, but year 1 especially so. We will have to establish relationships with all members of our team to create cohesive units of study that foster student learning throughout the entire school year. So if you're in year 1 as a director of instruction, and maybe you're new to a district or you're new to the role itself, you're going to have to establish those relationships with everyone around you. And this is going to take time. You shouldn't expect to immediately have all the respect or all the trust of every single individual right away. Relationships do need to be built. Just how we build relationships with students right now over the course of time, it's going to be the same process working with teachers, other administrators, other directors, and all the members of our curriculum design team. And, we're going to build these relationships just through consistent and dedicated, work with other individuals and respect and understanding with them. There will likely need to be a lot of research done in order to ensure that textbooks are standards aligned and have common assessments. We'll come back to assessments a little bit, just a little bit here, but make sure that textbooks are standards aligned. Textbooks change all the time. Standards also may change over time. So we have to be making sure that our textbooks are aligned with those standards. Otherwise, we can't really move forward without that. We also may need a perspective of a consultant. The example they provided in their book was from the Washington Unified School District, location 4977. But we may need to get a consultant on board with us. This could be somebody who worked previously in the role. This could be an individual who worked on in this role in the past. But in year one, especially if we're new to this job, we're not going to know everything we need to know right away. And we may need the support and guidance of others who have experience and have worked in these roles before. So reaching out to a consultant may be important. We'll need to work on recruitment of teachers for the rigorous curriculum design teams. I typically are going to be looking at 2 to 4 teachers per grade level and per content area. We don't want these design teams to be too large. Um, if we have too many members involved with the team, things can be very difficult to then manage and create. So 2 to 4 teachers per grade level and again per content area. These smaller group sizes help collaboration and decision making. As we go through here as well, in year one, we're going to want to review and establish the 5 foundational steps of the rigorous curriculum design process. And if we wanted to go back through those 5 steps, we can find on location 5084. We will also want to attend a rigorous curriculum design overview. Should say attend a RCD overview, but we want to make sure that we are aware of all the aspects and items within a rigorous curriculum design as well. We also want to have reviews on units from other grade levels and provide feedback as well. Feedback and reviews are going to be very important every year we go through this rigorous curriculum design and the implementation of these units and of these assessments. We're going to constantly need to be providing feedback to teachers, teachers to administrators, teachers to teachers, but all the members of these teams need to work together on feedback. And we also need to determine how feedback will be collected, how to decide if feedback needs a revision, and how to gather teacher perspectives and suggestions. And also, how will units be revised in the upcoming years as well? Once we create these units that are in our curriculum, they're not just set in stone. We're going to need to make revisions and adaptations to these units throughout the years. And in this first year one, we want to establish how are we going to make those revisions in the future? How am I going to gain feedback from teachers? How am I going to gain different perspectives as well? These are all things to keep in mind as we go through year one here. As we transition, to year two, we're going to want to continue to build on the units of study. This may include adjustments of previous units. We'll want to create a timeline regarding completion of units and their implementation in years 2 and 3. Important to note, this timeline can be flexible, but provides a roadmap for others. Kind of how I talked about pacing calendars, creating a timeline to show others when we expect things to be implemented this year, now in year 2, and also in future years. It's going to be important to give people just kind of a general sense and general guideline of what they can expect, when they can expect things to happen. But know that this is not a rigid timeline. It is flexible. Again, it's just to provide a roadmap and a guide, so we kind of know we're having a picture of what we want to do. In year 2 as well, and this is something that Donovan especially noted, there may be questions you don't know the answer to yet, and that is okay. We don't necessarily need to pretend that we know the question or the answer to every single question we come across. There are going to be questions that a teacher is going to ask us, that another administrator might ask us, that we are maybe not familiar with quite yet. And we need to be open and honest with them about those topics. If we don't know the answer to a question, don't make something up, or uh, don't be afraid to tell somebody, hey, I don't have the answer to this, but I'm going to get there. And when I have that answer, it will be a clear, fair, and objective answer as well that aligns with all the information we need to have. So don't be afraid if there's something you don't maybe know quite yet. Going back again, remind teachers that the rigorous curriculum designs a flexible framework. Make sure that learning activities match the unwrapped concepts we talked about last week and the skills of the priority standards. So making sure that any learning activities with the units of um, curriculum, again, are matching those unwrapped concepts. Communicate the why. Make sure to explain to your team members why we are doing the things we are doing. Why are we following these priority standards? Why are the standards important? Why is the design of our curriculum important? Um, why do we need to have pre and post assessments? Why is it important for us to see student growth, learning, achievement? Why is the data on all of this so critical and important to us and our students and our school district as well? I'll continue working on revision of units. As I mentioned earlier, these units are not set in stone once they're created. They need to be revised and have more done in them. And also use data teams to analyze student evidence and support collaboration of instructional leadership. So again, using data all the time is something that will never go away. Data is very important to us. It provides us with evidence to back up and support the decisions that we make. And that is part of why data is so critical and so important to us. And then as we get to year 3 here, what can we expect? In year 3, you're going to need the continued support of colleagues, site administrators, and teachers. The support we get from our team members is always going to be there. We're never going to reach a point where one individual has all the answers or knows everything there is to know, or is just a perfect master on the topic. And there's going to always be times when this work is challenging and when this work does push us to struggle. And that is okay. We will get through those struggles with support, again, from our colleagues, administrators, and other teachers as well. Look for their support, welcome it, and work as a team with them. But by now in year 3, we've been working with our units of study. They should be completed by this point. So now we have our units of study, we have our priorities standards assigned to them, we have our pacing calendars. So at this point, our curriculum design has really started to take a sharp focus. We may have a district-wide learning day on topics regarding the units of study. So this will take place before the school year typically starts. Right, we will be looking at what are these units of study that we have created. This may need a professional district day to work with teachers and to show teachers what the units are and kind of how the implementation of them is going to go throughout the school year. By now, we should have a team of teacher leaders who communicates to others about the rigorous curriculum design implementation. So when we are communicating our expectations of the rigorous curriculum design implementation, we do want to have, as it mentions here, a team of teacher leaders. Now, don't forget about the importance of having those teams and those communication teams to relay information to the rest of the school and the district as well. And these teachers are going to have the up-to-date information. They're going to be working collaboratively with you, with other site administrators, but they're going to be, very well informed on these topics and know how to communicate about how this curriculum is going to be implemented within the classrooms. So they're going to communicate this information to other teachers in the district and in the building. But with this communication, administrators and district leaders should also be present as well because they have been part of this team, part of this process up to this point. But in year 3, time is now given to teachers to create topics and content relevant to the standards. So within these units of instruction, teachers are now going to be thinking about and creating the topics they're going to teach, the content they're going to bring, the material that is going to be present within each unit of study. We also need to ensure that teachers maintain focus on the priority standards as they develop topics and content. So as we are working with teachers and teachers are working with their team leaders and their other individuals within the building, are they maintaining that focus on the priority standards? We need to ensure that is happening in order for our curriculum design to be effective and again to promote student learning, student growth, and student achievement. We'll need to ensure that pre and post assessments, performance tasks, and pacing calendars are fully implemented by this point. And some general administrative responsibilities here in year 3. Continue having meetings to support teachers in the work that is to be done. So just because we're here in year 3 and we've implemented our rigorous curriculum design, we're starting to implement the content and topics within the units. We have our standards assigned. The work is not done. As we kind of mentioned also in years 1 and 2, the work on these units are always going to be updated, to be worked on, and to be modified as well. So continue having meetings with teachers and with the teams. Support them where they need supports and answer questions when they need to be answered. Review the rigorous curriculum design units. They'll be implemented throughout the year. Now, just going through the units, making sure that the information in them and that their design and their implementation, again, does align with those priority standards, meet the criteria that we need to meet. And also review the pacing calendar. Go over a review of the pacing calendar and make sure that it is accurate and that is something that everybody can follow. At this point, teachers should also be providing feedback for implemented rigorous curriculum design units as well. So the teachers are going to be the ones working with this curriculum throughout the school year. Their feedback, their thoughts, their opinions on it is going to be as important as anything else that we do. Also keep in mind, this process and these processes don't end after year 3. We're going to be going through a lot of these same features and same work topics in years 4, 5, 6, 7, however long you were in that role. The process does not stop and it continues. Continued collaboration and revisions will be needed on rigorous curriculum design units as the years progress. As we've mentioned various times already, revisions, updates, feedback is going to go into these units to update them and to ensure that the standards are being met and to ensure that the data we have shows student growth and student learning and student progress. With clarity, objectiveness, and knowledge of standards will help all involved to make sure that implementation of rigorous curriculum design units continues to improve and show student growth, learning, and success. So we mentioned it earlier in this conversation as well, but these priority standards are going to change a little bit over time as well. Throughout the years and through our educational careers, we will see updates, modifications. We need to be aware of these and to make sure that our units of instruction do align with these standards. They do align with the data to support them as well. So that is what we have here for week 3. Again, we talked about some background knowledge of why I decided to get into a career in educational leadership. We talked about some aspects of summer school programs, talked about instructional approaches and differentiation within the classrooms. We also took a look at some aspects of virtual learning. And I apologize because I believe that I did not address the advantages and disadvantages of virtual learning in the classroom. So um, I'll take that on here at the end quickly, and I apologize for that. Skipped over that one, but real quick here to wrap it up, we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of virtual learning. We see that in our, excuse me, in our study here from Dunn, the advantages and disadvantages of virtual learning. And she lists some of those advantages and disadvantages here. We are probably very familiar with a lot of these topics as they were very relevant to us during these last couple school years during the COVID pandemic when a lot of us were forced to go on remote learning. But the following table presents the most advantages of online learning experienced by students. So here are some advantages of virtual learning. We are protecting individual health and community safety. We are saving travel time. And real quick, I'll just zoom in on that, make that a little larger. We are exposing to new forms of learning. We are keeping up with the original plan of the semester. We are having extra time for self-study. And we are having easy access to online resources. So some of these advantages of virtual learning, as they mentioned here, are a lot of the big ones. For students and schools, safe travel time is a huge advantage of virtual learning. Schools now are not liable for student safety on school buses, transportation to and from after school programs or sporting events. And this helps the community safety as well, right? We don't have these large school buses with 50 to 70 kids on them. Parents in the community generally feel safer about the roads and about the safety of the children. We also don't have to worry about safety on school grounds in regards to playground or safety equipment, gym equipment. So student health is also kept safe there. Exposure to new forms of learning. Being a remote learner does provide just a different perspective and a different instructional approach for students. Some are going to benefit immensely from that. Having extra time for self-study. Those students, when they are working at home, as we do through UWS and the online program here, when you're not commuting to and from school on a daily basis, you have that extra time to stay at home and to study and work on your material. For some students, they might be on the bus for an hour before school and for an hour after school is out. That's 2 hours of their Monday through Friday that they lose because they're waiting on the bus just to get home. So when they're at home, they have that extra time there for themselves. And then having easy access to online resources. When students need those online resources, whether it's Google Classroom, Google Meets, Zoom meetings, digital libraries, that information and those resources are provided to them from the teacher and from the school. And ideally, those are presented in very accessible ways for them as well. However, though, like with everything else, there are disadvantages to the online learning as well. Some of these disadvantages: excessive time staring at digital screens, lack of body movements, lack of conditions for developing social interaction skills, fears of online assessments, suffering from concentration loss, lack of peer interaction in virtual classrooms. difficulties in hearing the voice of the instructors, lack of time and condition to practice speaking with peers and teachers, difficulties in acquiring the contents of the lessons, lack of interaction with instructors, and difficulties in following the study schedules and lack of self-discipline. So with the remote learning, a lot of this material and the responsibility of learning the material does fall on the students. Now, with remote learning, we did a lot of practice of students need to keep their screen on at all times. Students need to be looking at the camera, facing the camera. They need to talk occasionally to the camera. Those things are almost impossible to monitor from a teacher's perspective. When a student is 10, 15, 20 miles away from the school or where you're at, you really can't force them to keep their computer on. It can harm their grade. There can be some repercussions from it, but we're still concerned about student learning and student achievement at the end of the day. And when students can be afforded to space out due to lack of concentration loss or suffering from concentration loss, that makes the attentiveness for the students much harder to manage and engage them in. With online and virtual learning as well, while we can play different videos, we can present them with different games, and we still can present different materials to them. It can still be very easy for students to not be engaged in the lessons they are working on, especially when they are not developing social interactive skills or they're not having peer interactions when they are in a virtual classroom. And they don't have a classmate next to them to work with and push them and to help strive them to learn and to grow. They really are being accountable on their own because not every kid as well is going to have a parent at home to necessarily keep an eye on them and to ensure they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Um, Difficulty hearing the voice of the instructors, technological difficulties always are presented in virtual classrooms as well. Stability of people's internet. Not everybody in the country has access to high speed, reliable internet. The power goes out, there's a bad storm. Um, there are a number of things that can happen there that are going to prohibit student learning. When students are in the classroom with us, we're more in control of those types of aspects. So then the lack of interaction with instructors as well. When students have questions on material, when students need help with something, it's not always easy to get that help, via email or via a Zoom meeting or team meeting. For some students, getting that help is going to be easiest when they're with a teacher face to face. They can see a teacher model something hands-on for them. They can have a face-to-face conversation with them. That's gonna make acquiring the content of the lessons more accessible to students as well. So, there are advantages, there are disadvantages. I think when we're looking at virtual or remote learning, we don't want to have that be the one all be all, but however, it is a good resource for us to have, in case it is needed, such as it was during the 2020-2021 school years. So I apologize again for missing out on that earlier, but hopefully that now covers all the topics that we had for today. Again, if there are questions, concerns, or any additional information that is needed, please reach out to me. Thank you for watching.